This video is brought to you by YTAndrewPaul Tech Repairs. If you have a console, laptop, computer or Macbook in need of repair in the UK or the EU, then have a look in the description below this video for details on how to contact us in order to organise your repair. Right, hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's video. And today we're going to be taking a look at this PS4 with a rather nasty HDMI port. This is an SAB-001 revision motherboard, so it's one of the earlier PS4 boards, and as you can see, somebody's been having a right good old time with this one. So basically this was sent into a repair shop in the UK, who took one look at this and decided, nope, we're not doing that, and they referred the repair to myself. And to be honest, I can see now exactly why they were thinking bugger that, because I'm thinking the same thing now. I'm sat looking at it. But in the interest of fairness and just to prove that this can be repaired, we're going to do it. So first of all, you'll notice that there is some rather sort of shiny sticky stuff all over this area of the board. So the first thing we're going to do is get this thing clean so we can see exactly what we're working with. So you'll notice here there's a variation of colours on this HDMI header. So we have this one here, which is like bare copper. There's not much going on there. That looks like there is a partial leg of the previous HDMI port stuck to it. So either that port's had a big whack or somebody's cut it off. Same here, same here. So there's three pads with HDMI port legs stuck to it. So yeah, it would appear either this had a big whack or somebody's cut it off. It's very unusual actually that they snap there. So I mean, even like I've seen some boards that have had some real big whacks on them before, and I've never seen the pin split. So I'm thinking somebody may have tried to cut it off, which may also explain how the other pins have all got ripped off, because it may have looked like they were all cut through, but maybe they weren't. And in fact, then what's happened is as they've come to pull the port free, oops, it's all come off. And as you can see here, we have a few, well, what were tracers. So you can see that these here, very gingerly attached to these vias here at the end, those would have run down in these channels to the appropriate pads, but as you can see, those are now completely missing. So yeah, that's not particularly brilliant. And as you can see here, look, the tiniest nick, you can see the tiniest bit of copper there sneaking through. Yeah, these have split. So these are going to be very, very weak. So we ain't going to be able to do anything at all with those. And even if we could, there's no pads on the bottom. You can see there, it's just the actual copper contact pad has gone walkies. That's long gone. It's probably stuck to the bottom of the old port. So yes, there's not much to be done with those. So those are going to have to be link wired in. And then we're going to have to see what sort of state the rest of the header's in, but we can only really do that once we have this board clean and in one piece and ready to work. So what we're going to do is we're just going to apply a tiny bit of heat to the board. And the reason we're going to do that is just to try and loosen this flux residue. Okay, so that's now liquidous. So we're just going to squirt some IPA onto there and give it a clean. Now then, you've sort of got to weigh up the benefits of being careful to the, you know, getting the board clean. And let's face it, you know, this board is fairly badly damaged as it is. So if I end up ripping those copper tails out, I'm not really all that bothered because they've got to come out anyway. So yes, we're just going to get this header clean. So we can see what we've got to work with. Hopefully this isn't going to be as bad as it looks, but I actually have an original photo that the repair shop sent me before they took what was left of the port off. If I think on, and I can find it in my emails, I'll probably paste it in here, but so you can have a quick look. Okay, so that header's now fairly clean. We've got rid of the flux residue that was on there, so we can actually see it now. So I'm just going to straighten you up here because you're a little bit wonky. Okay, so like I said to you before, we have a few various bits and pieces. Don't worry about the tiny bit of what was left of the cotton bud. We'll get that off before we've finished. Anyway, so yeah, you can see, like I say, the orangey coppery coloured bits here, here, and here are legs from the old port. The black bits here are where these pads would have been. So these black areas would have looked like this big silver bit next door. Yeah, and they'd have all been in there, and that's what the HDMI port will solder to. So as we can see here, we don't actually have any of that because those have all been long since ripped out. And then up here, you can see we've actually removed during the cleaning process because, let's face it, they were just hanging in the breeze and they were really weak and delicate anyway. So they've just broken off and they've broken away. So they've left the vias intact. So that's what we're going to be running our link wires to shortly. As I say, we'll go and explain all this as we're doing it. But yes, so the first thing to do for me is to get this HDMI header into some sort of serviceable state. So that's going to be removing the remnants of the old pads. It's going to be, you can sort of see how mottled this one is here. That's probably oxidation. So we're going to have to run some fresh solder over these just to make sure that they are indeed solderable. They will be. They just look a bit brown and mottled because of oxidization. So when we put some flux and some new solder on there, that should get rid of that. So we're just going to put some flux down on the board. So the flux we're using today is Amtech NC559V2TF. If you're looking for some in the UK, the distributor in the UK is Insat. So I would only be tempted to go there and buy it. Steer clear of Amazon and eBay and places like that because the likelihood is you will get fake stuff. I'm not saying you will 100% of the time, but yeah, there isn't much of the genuine stuff kicking around outside the official resellers channels. So I'll put a link to the description to Insat if you need some or you want some. It's extremely good flux. I would recommend it highly. It's not cheap. It's fairly expensive. You can certainly get cheaper stuff, but for me, nothing works quite like it. So what we're going to do is we're going to run some leaded solder over the port header and in the grounding pins. So I'm just going to fill those up as well. So we're ready to stick a new HDMI port through there. Any remnants of the old port will go. And then we're just going to run some leaded solder on the iron over the pads. And you'll see there that that has not only left a nice shiny uniform coating of solder on the pads, but you'll notice as well that it's actually lifted off the remnants of those pins that were left over from the old HDMI port, which is what you want, of course. You can't solder a new pin onto that pad if it's still got half the old leg stuck to it. So we'll just give this a really quick clean off with some IPA, just to show you now what everything's looking like. Okay, so you can see there now that everything's looking nice and uniform, nice and shiny, nice and straight. Nothing's loose, nothing looks like it's sticking up. It's all nice and firmly inside the board. Yeah, there's nothing sinister going on there. So that's cool. So what we do have is we have 1, 2, 3, 4 link wires to run in here. So this, of course, this side here is where the ports are, and this side back here is obviously the motherboard side. So from left to right in this orientation, you have pin 1 down here, pin 19 over here. So we'll just give it a count and make sure we've got them all. So 1, 2, 3 is missing, 4, 5, 6 and 7 are missing, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 is missing, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 and 19. So yes, we do indeed have 4 pins missing. That's cool. So if we take a look over here, we can see therefore that these missing pads here, these nice big black areas, run up to these little tiny circles up here. And these little tiny circles up here are called vias. And vias basically are tiny pathways through the board. Think of them as staircases. So essentially this board here, although it might look like there's two sides to it, actually within there are so many connections and components and everything else on this board that the board itself is made up of like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, however many layers. You can see the top layer and the bottom layer, but you can't see all the ones in between. And that's required because all these components, the memory blocks, the south bridge, APU, all that sort of stuff have so many connection points on them that there's simply not enough room to get them all on 1 or 2 layers. So they have to go down within the board. So how the hell do they get these connection points to run down through other layers of the board? They use vias. So these here are full vias, and full vias basically go all the way through the board. So they go through from this top layer all the way down to the bottom. And then you've got a partial via. Now, a partial via will only go down so far. So say there's 14 layers on your board. Some will go down as far as the second layer, some will go down as far as the third, some as far as the fourth, and everything else, etc., etc., etc. So basically what happens is eventually you get this little sandwich that's connected by all these little staircases. Think of them as floors in your house. Same thing with vias. So that's what these little tiny circles do. They go, in this particular instance on the HDMI port, these go all the way through to the bottom side of the board, across to where the EMI filters sit, and the EMI filters essentially then sit behind, or in front of, should I say, the HDMI encoder IC, which is responsible for mixing the audio and video signals, scaling the output to your nice 1080p or 4K display, and obviously you get your nice picture and sound and things from your games to your PS4, from your PS4 to your TV. So what we're going to do is, you can see that these little black pathways here would have been connected to where the little black pads were. So the black here, essentially there's nothing there anymore. That's the substrate, that's the fiberglass of the board. So there's no contacts, there's no nothing there. You can't solder to that. It's buggered. So, and essentially the same thing up here. So these little copper pathways that would have been in the board are being ripped out, to the point where now you can't see anything in there. It's just a bare fiberglass beneath. So there's actually a channel there. You know, you can catch your tweezer blades in it. Essentially that copper pathway would have sat in there. You can't do that anymore because it's not there. So essentially it just looks like it's black. Okay, so there's nothing in there. So what we need to do is we need to restore this pathway to this via. So of course you'll notice that these vias are green, and that's something called conformal coating. So essentially what that does is, if we left the copper exposed on the board, what would happen over time is it would tarnish and eventually it would corrode. And that simply is just a case, you know, it's just simple fact of life, unfortunately. Copper, when exposed to the elements, will corrode. And it's the exact same sort of principle we have here. So what's happening is to prevent that, and to prevent damage from, say, somebody opening it up and having a prod around in there, what they do is they stick this green coating on it, and this is conformal coat. And what happens is that insulates and protects the copper beneath, protects it from the air and the moisture in the air and things like that. So over time, it doesn't corrode, which is great. But of course, we can't solder to that. And even if we could, it'd insulate the copper, so we wouldn't get any connection between whatever we were soldering it to. So what we need to do is, we need to strip back that green coating so that we can actually get to the copper beneath and solder to it. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. Now I'd recommend this. This here is a fiberglass pencil. Essentially all it is those little tiny shards at the end there are fiberglass. Now be careful, because these are really tiny. They do sort of powder up and they can get on your skin. If they got on your skin, they're like little tiny splinters of wood, essentially, but you can't see them because they're so fine. They're finer than human hair. So if they get stuck in your fingers, one, it's really difficult to see it. Two, it hurts like hell. So always make sure you're wearing gloves if you are going to be using a fiberglass pencil, and keep yourself well away from the fibres in the end. Alternatively, you can use a Stanley blade. I wouldn't recommend that if you're not used to this kind of work, because it is easy to cut through the board. It is easy to cut through the vias, and if you cut through the vias, you kind of cut your stairwell off. So you really are in trouble. I mean, you can go to the bottom side and do, you know, and run wires from the top to the bottom, but that's just a pain in the backside. You don't really want to be doing that. So be really, really gentle if you are using a Stanley blade. I would always recommend you rather use one of those. Now then, I like to get it started with the Stanley blade. So, but then I've been doing this a long time, so I'm used to it. So you'll notice there actually it's kind of moving because there's still a little bit of that trace stuck on the end of it. So we're just going to get started. We're just going to start scraping away at these. Okay. So all we're doing is we're scraping away at the vias that would have joined onto where the copper's being lifted out. So where the little black line runs to, essentially, we're just scraping that via back. Those little black lines, otherwise, are normally called traces. Traces essentially like little roadways, little pathways between components and various places on your board. So they carry the signal or the power, the voltage and everything else between components on your motherboard. Without them, you wouldn't be able to build a circuit. So of course, once they're missing, essentially you cut that pathway off. So what happens is the signal just stops because it can't get to where it needs to go. So we're being light here, we're not being too heavy-handed with it. And then we're just going to start rubbing away with the fiberglass pencil. Now then, it's also possible that you can do some fairly severe damage to the board with the fiberglass pencil, so you still need to be careful, but it's definitely less harsh. Definitely less harsh than the edge of a Stanley knife blade. So if you're a beginner or you're in any doubt at all, use the fiberglass pencil. Only be gentle with it. You're not pressing into the board, you're letting the abrasiveness of the fiberglass. Oops, I just realised I had my microphone away from me there. So yeah, what I was saying is that if, you can still do some fairly serious damage to the board using the fiberglass pencil. So you're not putting any undue pressure on the board at all. You're not pushing into the board, you're letting the abrasiveness of the fiberglass do the work for you. If you push into the board with a fiberglass pencil, you can do very similar sort of damage to what you could do with a Stanley blade. As in, you can push through the via and cut into the board, and then once you've done that, it's kind of difficult to get it back. Okay, so we're just going to get some more IPA to clean the board with. IPA is isopropyl alcohol, just a sort of cleaning solvent essentially. This is 99% proof, so it's strong. Don't drink it. It isn't absinthe, don't drink it. It will not do you any good. It isn't the type of alcohol you drink. Right, so we can see there that we have some copper exposed. My fiberglass pencil is actually running out, which is really annoying. So we're just finishing off by hand here. Don't know what I did with my cotton bud. I have no idea. Lost it. So we can see there we have some nice shiny vias to solder our new wires to when we run them, and we have some nice shiny straight pads there to solder to when we put our new port in place. So that's all looking rather nice, which is cool. So what we're going to do with these, before we do anything else, I'm going to put a tiny bit of flux up here. So now we've scraped the copper back and we've got something we can solder to. We've put some flux down on there now. What we're going to do is we're just going to touch a tiny bit of solder onto each hole. There we go. Okay, so I'll just clean that bit of flux back just to show you what we've done. So essentially you can see there now that those vias have solder filled inside them, and that essentially now has converted those little vias to tiny little solder pads. So rather than having holes through the board that we couldn't solder to before, we've now essentially got the same thing there as what we have here. We've converted them to pads, so they're now a lot easier to solder to. So everything's now prepared and we're ready to install our new HDMI port. So we'll go ahead and do that now. So we're just going to support the board, stand it up, get you back in focus so you can see what it is that we're doing. Okay, so our board's there now. So we just supported the board up in the air slightly. What we're going to do now, we're going to run some flux over the header and over where the ground pins would sit. Okay, I'm going to go in now with the hot air when I can find the HDMI ports. What I like to do is get the HDMI ports in a pair of grips like this. So we're just going to go over these solder pads with the hot air. But we're looking for those ground holes to go nice and shiny. I'm looking for the solder to sink in through the board. And then once we see that, now then, it does look as though these holes are slightly out of position. The new port's actually getting stuck on something in the holes. So I wonder if there's actually still some leg stuck in these holes. Kind of makes sense if somebody's cut them off. So what we're going to have to do now, see, this is the problem when you cut the when you cut the old port out of the holes, because of course the legs are still in there. So when you come to put the new port in, the legs get stuck in the board and you can't push the new port through. So we're just going to have to try and flush the holes through with some solder. Try and get as much of it out as we can. So I'm just going to have a quick look underneath here and see if anything's now sticking out the other side. Yeah, there is. You can just about see the remnants left in that top left-hand corner. So all you do, if you have that and you run into the same problem, you can just run some leaded solder into the holes, work it back and forward. And eventually, what will happen is, whatever's stuck in the hole will be pushed out of the bottom. Right, we're going to have another go. We're going to have another go. Just going to run some more flux over the header. I'll bring our HDMI port back here. There we go. You can see there now, look, that went straight in. So just going to check the sighting, make sure it's flat. It's level with the board, because if not, now's the time to adjust it. Yeah, looking lovely. So, there we go. So if we bring you back in shot now, you should see there's a HDMI port. Everything's all lined up. You can see the pins are nice and straight and lined up lovely there over the header. It's beautiful. Excellent. There we go. And everything's nice and flat with the board. Everything's nice and flush. That's what you want. That's what you're after. Yeah, I didn't think on earlier actually when we saw that those pins were still stuck to the HDMI header. I didn't actually think on that somebody may have just cut the feet off. I suspect that's possibly why people do it, because they can't actually get the feet out. They can't get the board hot enough to get the legs out. So they can't remove the port. So what they do is they just snip it, which just creates more problems than it solves, because ultimately you've still got to get the legs out of the board. The difference being when they're not attached to anything and they're stuck in the hole, they're a lot harder to get out than they are otherwise. So just switch tips here to a smaller one. So we're just going to go over the header now. So we've applied some more flux to the header. And of course, the pads on the motherboard have all been tinned. So the heat from the soldering iron and the flux should encourage the solder from the pads we put on the board earlier to flow up onto the legs and create a nice solid joint. So we just drag the tip of the soldering iron here over the pins until they go nice and shiny. You'll notice that there aren't any bridges appearing between pin and pad, and that's because we've got everything nicely fluxed up. Use plenty of flux and a nice hot soldering iron. You'll be able just to drag over the surface, a bit like what we're doing here, without bridging anything. If you try this and you do end up bridging things, then it's likely that you haven't got enough flux on your board or enough temperature on your iron. So we're using a JBC DDE2B soldering station here with a T245A handle. So with the JBC, of course, because there's such an efficient design, you can get away with a lot lower temperature. We're on 350 here. So we're just going over these solder points a few times, making sure they're all covered in solder. Making sure that the solder's flowed up onto each pin, making sure that each pin is in situation. So it's 3, 7, 8 and 13 if I remember rightly that we need to be doing some work on. Okay, so what we're going to do now, before we go any further, we're just going to clean the flux from the HDMI port. Okay, so we just run some more IPA over there with the cotton bud. Again, we're not really putting any pressure on, we're just using the strength of the solvent to do its work. Just to lift out the flux. And that's just so we can get a better look at the pins underneath. Okay. So there we are. There are our HDMI pins. So what we're going to do, we're going to give each one of these something called the nudge test. The nudge test is essentially the end of a fine pair of tweezers. And what we do is we lightly push against each leg and we check for any movement. We shouldn't see any movement. If we see movement, we know that pin isn't soldered. And we have to go back and solder it. So 3's fine, 4's fine, 5's fine, 6 is fine, 7 is fine. I suppose we should be counting backwards because technically this is pin 19. So 19's good, 18's good, 17's good, 16's good, 15's good, 14's good, 13's good, 12. Pin 12 is the pin we were missing. 12's missing. 11's good, 10's good, 9's good, 8's good, 7 is missing, 6 is missing, 5 is good, 4 is good, 3 is missing, 2 is good, and 1 is good. So brilliant. So we have 12, was it 7, 6, and 3 that we need to rebuild now. So our HDMI port is soldered, which is fantastic. We just need to run our link wires down here. And we also need to check the soldering of the pins in the base. So on the bottom side of the motherboard, just to make sure they're soldered in. But you'll notice that if you get your board nice and hot, and you use plenty of flux that when you dip the legs through the holes, they solder themselves nicely there. There's a bit of corrosion around that edge of the board there, bit of crustiness, probably old flux from the previous repair attempt, but we can get that off with a bit of IPA when we come to reassemble. But yeah, so our ground feet are nicely soldered in, and I've got this board the wrong way around like an idiot, so just get you back in view. Okay, so there we are. So everything's now ready for our link wires. Lovely, lovely link wires. So these two shouldn't be too bad. 12 here and 3 here should be alright, because obviously, you know, yeah, you've got pins next to them, but it's not so bad. You've got a bit of room either way. Where it's awkward is when you get 2 together, because you can't really stray too far just in case you knock the other wire, because it doesn't take long to bring them off. There's not a lot of surface area contact here to reflow, so you've got to be careful when you get 2 apart like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to strip a tiny piece of this stuff. This is enamelled wire. I do sell this if you're in need of it. Just hit me up. Essentially, it looks like naked exposed copper wire, but it isn't. It's enamelled. So it's got a transparent enamelled coating on the outside edge, which means that because it doesn't have any plastic sheathing or anything out there, not only is it fairly flexible, but it's also great if you are limited for space, like at the back of HDMI ports where the pins are really close together. So to strip it back, all you do is you get some solder on the end of your soldering iron. Stick it in a ball. Just leave it there for 10 seconds or so. And what it does is the heat and the solder strips back the enamel coating on the wire and leaves you with something that looks a bit like that. Okay, so there's a little bit too much stripped back there, to be fair. You only want a tiny bit at the end. You only want a tiny bit on the end. So we're just going to put a tiny dab of flux on the end of the wire. And then we offer this up as flat as we can get it to the board. And I'm going to have to try and solder this with my left hand, so this should be comical. So give it a quick wiggle and a tug, and that's not going anywhere. So that should be fine. Then what we do is we need to run this to where our pin needs to run to. So essentially we just follow the black line in the board. So in this instance, if I can find you, this wire needs to connect that 3rd pin down to this via. So what we do, we get 2 pairs of tweezers. We get one to hold the thing flat and nip it where we want to bend it. And then we use the other pair of tweezers to actually do the bending. Okay, and we get it somewhere close. So in our instance here, we want to keep that pin nice and straight. So what we do then is we hold the wire so that the pin is straight and it goes over where we want to solder it to. So here, put a bit of pressure on with the blade and then we're just going to wiggle it. Okay, there we go. Fantastic. Just squirt a bit of IPA behind that port just to make sure that it's still where Mother Nature intends it to go. Yeah, that's okay. Alright then. So, next job. A bit of flux on the end of the link wire. Bit of solder. So the thing to be careful of here is the heat will carry up that wire, and it's only short, so it won't take a lot. So what can happen is you can end up inadvertently reflowing the other end of the joint. So really light pressure. Let the heat of the iron do the work. There we go. And then what we're going to do, spin you sideways. And move the wire back into position. Pay particular attention that our wire is still straight. And there we go. It's taking a bit of buggering about, but we've got there in the end. So you'll notice there, look, that our wire is nice and strong. And it's nice and straight. We're not touching any of the adjacent pins, and that our wire is nicely soldered down here now to where it needs to go. Fantastic. So that's one down, another 3 to go. Lovely. So try not to lose your rag with it. Try not to lose your patience with it, because it is fiddly work at the best of times. And if you wind yourself up enough to get mad at it, then all that happens is well, it just makes things a bit of a nightmare for you. So I do believe it's this one here and this one here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pin 6. Yeah, if you get mad with it, you just make your own life harder, really. So I know it's easier said than done, because I've got a particularly short fuse with crap like this when it starts buggering me about. But take a deep breath and just let it wash over you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So pin 6 is this one down here. Okay, that looks like it's in position. So always give it a quick wiggle after we've attached it to the leg, because that helps you get some sort of idea as to whether it's in place or not. So as before, we're just going to get a hold of this wire where we want to bend it. Make sure the pin's nice and straight before you do. And then get a hold of it and just encourage it with the other pair of tweezers. All times try and make sure the wire's kept flat to the board, so if it's kinked up like that, all you do is get hold of it with the other pair of tweezers. Just try and flatten it down, manipulate it so that it stays nice and flat. Okay? If you do that, you won't go far wrong. Okay. So that's the second pin in. Third pin. Right. So that's that. It's attached. So that's good. Now we're going to go back and do our old trick. Now we want to be careful here, of course, because we're going directly to the view next door, so we don't want to strip too far back, because we don't want to be bridging into the other view. Okay, that's nice and strong there. Give it a nudge, it's fine. And this side, of course, make sure that we're nice and straight, that we're not touching anything we shouldn't be touching there. That we're nice and strong, yeah, we look good. We look fine, okay. So last one then, pin 12. So 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There it is, waggling around in the breeze. Okay, that's on. Turn you around. Right. Flat to the board. Make sure the pin's nice and straight. Blade through. Wiggle, wiggle. Tweezers. Tweezers are for it. These tweezers are for the bin when I finish this today. I mean it this time. Amazon, you're going to be selling some tweezers. So. I'll strip the end of this wire. Like that. As before, spin you round. So you can see where we're going here. Flat to the board. In fact, I think it may already be sold to the view. Nice and sturdy there. Excellent. Right, so our 4 wires are now in place. They're all on. So I'm just going to give them a nudge. They're all nice and straight. They're not touching anything else. So give that a nudge. That's fine. That one a nudge. That's fine. That one a nudge. That one's fine. That one a nudge. Well, that one's fine. Excellent. So we're going to give this some clean off with some IPA. Not run over too hard on it. Of course, if anything comes loose now, it's better it comes loose now than it does once it's all nailed back together. So if it's going to come loose in, if it's going to come loose in cleaning off, then it wasn't attached properly to begin with. So don't lose any sleep over it. It just means you've saved yourself some headache further down the line. Of course, if everything stays nicely where it is, congratulations. And ours seems to have stayed exactly where we want them. Excellent. So we'll go and we'll give this a proper clean up in a sec once we've tested it. But yeah, that all looks fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to get some of this stuff. This is conformal overcoat. This is from MG Chemicals, this pen. The catalogue number is 419DPGR. We've mentioned this quite a few times on the channel already. Essentially what it does is it just covers everything to make sure that we can't short anything out. It also acts as like an epoxy, so it sort of just bonds everything into place. Now then, don't worry, because if you do ever have to take this off again at some point, you just put a bit of hot air on it, and it does sort of reliquefy, and from there you can go and take everything off. So it's not permanent. It's permanent while ever you leave it like this. So once it's dry, you can consider it permanent until you actually need to take it off, and you can take it off. So that's always nice. I'm confident there, though, that we've got this exactly where we need it, and that everything's tickety-boo and honky-dory. So I'm just cleaning the end of the pen off, because it's important to do that, because if the stuff dries in the end of the pen, then it blocks, and then you have some fun trying to get it out next time you come to use it. So we're just going to leave that to air dry now for the next sort of 10 minutes or so, and then we'll stick it back in the PlayStation and test it. Hopefully we'll have a picture. Right, okay then guys, so we've got our machine reassembled now. I'm quite confident it should work. So let's fire it up and see what we get. Now then, I do seem to recall a phone call last week about this machine having no software on its hard disk. And I'm not sure if we should be updating it or not. I'm going to err on the side of not. The signal was so bad I could barely make out what the guy was saying. But cannot start the PS4. There we go. Lovely. So we have a picture. We had the PS splash screen for a second, which is full 1080p. And as we can see there, it's nice and clear. There's no fuzziness. Everything should be absolutely fine from there. Excellent. Right, well, we're happy with that. So, what have we learned today, ladies and gentlemen? Well, we've learned that, well, a pretty terrible looking HDMI header can still be rescued even when it's in that sort of state. So, of course, remember, we had 4 differential pair wires ripped out of the board. We had bits of the legs of the old HDMI port still stuck in. We had the feet of the old port still stuck in the board, which was making getting the new one in pretty difficult. But yeah, as we can see, what we've done is we've managed to rectify all that, get the new port on, rebuild those missing pins, and as you can see now, our PlayStation is back in the land of the living. I am interested actually to see what version of firmware this is on, because like I said, I seem to recall a conversation last week about firmware version on this machine. So bear with me a sec. I still haven't got my bloody tripod, so I apologise for that. So yeah, 407. So I suspect they may want to leave it as as low down as possible. I'm not sure if this has another hard drive in, or I'm sure there was something. Like I said, the phone signal was absolutely terrible. I was in Works office at the time. But yes, so 407. There we go, and we're happy with that. that's ready to go back. So thank you very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you've enjoyed it and you found this useful. If you have, then please remember to pop a big thumbs up down below. It helps grow the channel. YouTube's algorithms use likes to calculate God knows what magic and witchcraft in the background, but essentially the more people like a video, the more it gets sort of recommended to others. So hopefully the more people see the channel and the channel grows, I do more videos. That's the way this works. So yeah, so if you could do that, that would be very much appreciated. If you have any questions at all, then feel free to pop them in the comments below. I do try and review them as often as I can. If you do want to contact me in regards to getting a repair of your own machine and you're in the UK or the EU, then by all means drop me a line on my business email address. It's YTAndrewPaul@outlook.com. If you're in need of components to repair your own machine, whether that's HDMI ports or just weird and wonderful components off motherboards that you've got missing, MacBooks, PlayStations, Xboxes, etc., and we ship those worldwide as well. So wherever you are, if you're in need of components, then again, that business email address you can drop a line to is YTAndrewPaul@outlook.com. It's also in the description of the video. Likewise, I'm also on Twitter. My DM box is open to everybody. That again is at YTAndrewPaul. So if you drop me a DM on there, I'll see it. If you tweet at me, I may not see it. I'll be honest, I don't really use Twitter. I don't particularly understand it. I use it as mainly an email inbox, to be honest, for odds and sods and everything else. So if you tweet at me, I may see it, I may not. If you definitely want to get hold of me, drop me a DM. That's probably the safest way to do it. I would normally say we take private messages on YouTube, but of course those are ending in July, so probably best not to use that anymore. But yes, so there's plenty of ways to get hold of me, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. Thank you for watching, and from me, until next time, it's bye for now, and I'll see you soon. Many thanks for watching then, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have, then why not check out these recommendations below. Also, please remember to comment, rate, and of course subscribe to the channel if you found this useful. We've plenty more content on there, and there's lots more to come.